Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. This week we've got another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is deck number 195 and it's titled The Petting Zoo. And if you haven't seen the show before, what we're doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com or from among suggested cards, working with a budget of $100 or less and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So this week our random card was suggested to us by Vintage over on Patreon/Discord. And for the first time in quite a while, we have a land as our random card of the week. We have Animal Sanctuary, which is a land. It taps for a colorless mana, or you can pay 2 and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on target bird, cat, dog, goat, ox, or snake. So it's a very unique card, and when I first started trying to build around this, I really had no idea what I was going to do. I thought about looking into one of the specific creature types, and it's a colorless land, so it can go in quite literally any deck. So it was really tough to kind of pare down what I wanted to do with it, and eventually I decided, obviously we got to add some colors. These creature types aren't really going to work colorless, so we did add some colors with our commander this week, because our commander is Akim the Soaring Wind. And Akim is 2 blue, red, white for a legendary creature bird dinosaur. It's a 3/4. It has flying, and whenever you create 1 or more tokens for the first time each turn, create a 1/1 white bird creature token with flying. Then you can pay 6, and creature tokens you control gain double strike until the end of turn. So Akim is going to be relevant for a couple of reasons. The main one, it's a bird. We wanted to have one of our creature types in the command zone, and it cares about tokens. Plus, those tokens it cares about are bird tokens, which is kind of just like a constant stream of tokens that fit what we want to be doing. So that is why we chose Akim for the command zone, but let's break down some of the themes for this deck and really take a look at what we're trying to do. So the very first theme that I want to make sure we highlight is going to be, of course, tokens. And again, specifically, we are looking at tokens of the creature types we care about. So that's bird, cat, dog, goat, ox, and snake. And so with all of those creature types, we have cards like Release the Dogs, which is 3 and a white for a sorcery, create 4 1/1 white dog creature tokens. Essentially being able to pay 4 mana for 4 tokens is pretty effective on rate, but also when you consider that we have Akim, we could get a bird to go along with this, and then we can pay 6 mana to give them all double strike. So that's kind of the game plan of what we're trying to do, is just flood the board with tokens, give them double strike, and make combat very difficult for our opponents. Moving on to our next theme, this one is of course going to be caring about our creature types in a flavorful way. So we have a lot of cards in here that may kind of be not the best removal spells in the world, but because they care about our creature types or even give them to our opponents, we're playing them because we want everyone to experience what it's like living in the petting zoo. So an example of that is Bovine Intervention, which is 1 and a white for an instant, destroy target artifact or creature, and its controller creates a 2/2 white ox creature token. Now, obviously, this is not the most impressive removal spell in the world. 2 mana for a destroy effect that also gives them a 2/2 isn't great, but again, we're giving them an ox, and since oxen are some of our supported creature types, we want to make sure that everyone gets the love of the petting zoo. Moving on to our final theme for the deck, this one is going to be things that care specifically about tokens. Prava of the Steel Legion here is a phenomenal example of that because she is 2 and a white for a 1/4 cat soldier. As long as it's your turn, creature tokens you control get +1/+4, and you can pay 4 to create a 1/1 white soldier creature token, and it has partner. Now, obviously partner is irrelevant for what we're trying to do, but giving all of our creature tokens +1/+4 is an insane boost in power. That means all of our 1/1s are now becoming 2 5s on our turn, and we can give them double strike with our commander. So we go from hitting for 1 to hitting for 4 just by having Prava and our commander in play. That is something that kind of pushes the deck way ahead of the rest of the table and puts us in a position where, of course, we can do some pretty wild things. Now, you'll also notice that Prava is also one of our supported creature types in being a cat, so we did lean into that pretty heavily as well. A lot of the support pieces also fit one of our creature types, which I thought going into this was actually going to be pretty difficult, but after building the deck was actually pretty easy, all things considered, so I was very impressed with how easy it was to squeeze those creature types together and make it feel synergistic. But anyway, those are all of our themes for the deck. So let's move on and talk about some of our key cards. And the first card that I want to highlight is a huge, well, MVP of the deck, which is why it's a key card, and that is going to be Aven Wind Guide. So Aven Wind Guide, 2 white, blue for a 2/3 bird warrior, very important that it's a bird, has flying, vigilance, and creature tokens you control have flying and vigilance. Then it embalms for 4 white and a blue. Most of the time, we're probably not embalming this, but being able to give all of our creature tokens flying and vigilance is insanely powerful in this deck, because being able to just push through a ton of damage in the air, be able to block on the way back, and again, if we have Akim, if we have Prava, we can push through a ridiculous amount of damage and just be an absolute menace to our opponents, even though we don't actually have menace, to be able to just deal a ton of damage kind of out of nowhere in an evasive way, in a way that prevents people from attacking us because we can still block. And Aven Wind Guide really does everything we want it to be doing in this deck. Moving on to our next key card, and this one is Skycat Sovereign. So Skycat Sovereign is a blue and a white for a 1/1 elemental cat. Again, cat, very important. It's a flying cat, and it gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control with flying, and you can pay 2 a white and a blue to create a 1/1 white cat bird creature token with flying. This doesn't look on the surface like it's actually very relevant, but you've got to keep in mind that when we're caring about our creature types, the fact that Skycat Sovereign makes a cat bird means that it's effectively fulfilling a third of the creature types just with that token. And being able to consistently get +1/+1 for everything with flying pairs well with Aven Wind Guide, it pairs well with the birds and with Akim, and Akim making more birds. So it's not unsurprising to see Skycat Sovereign go from a 1/1 to a 4/4 or a 5/5 and just be a pretty decent attacker in the air, or blocker if that's something you need. So I think that it really plays an important role in the deck for being able to create more tokens, but also just providing a bigger body, because a lot of our creatures are going to be on the smaller side, so that becomes relevant as the game progresses. Moving on to our final key card, this one is going to be Bolt Hound. So Bolt Hound, one of the few creatures that doesn't actively care about tokens or one of the creature types. It's just kind of a good creature of a type that we want. So Bolt Hound is 2 and a red for a 2/2 elemental dog. It has haste, and whenever it attacks, other creatures you control get +1/+0 until the end of turn. So like we mentioned with Skycat Sovereign needing to get creatures just a little bit bigger, Bolt Hound kind of effectively doubles our damage, because if we are attacking with an army of 1/1s, Bolt Hound is now going to turn them into 2/1s and double our damage output. But if we have Bolt Hound along with Akim and having the double strike, we're going from 1 damage to 2 to 4, which, similar to Prava, is a massive jump in power and a massive jump in damage. And because Bolt Hound has haste, we can actually do that out of nowhere. We do not need to worry about untapping with the Bolt Hound. We can just send it into combat and overwhelm our opponents with our board of tiny tokens that are now just a little bit bigger. And even though it's only +1, it's still enough to make a massive impact because, like I said, it's doubling our damage output. So those are all of our key cards for this week. The next thing we got to do is take a look at some cool interactions. These are cards that synergize really well with each other, and in some cases are win conditions all on their own. So the first pair of cards that I want to highlight is going to be Mist Syndicate Naga and Cub Warden. So this looks a little bit odd up front, but let me explain it to you. So first off, Mist Syndicate Naga is 2 and a blue for a 3/1 Snake Ninja. I know it says Naga Ninja, but all Naga at this point have been errated to be snakes. So if you do see a Naga in the deck, they are a snake now. And it has Ninjutsu for 2 and a blue, so we can return an unblocked attacker to our hand, put this card onto the battlefield tapped and attacking, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we create a token that's a copy of Mist Syndicate Naga. So we can essentially make one copy if we hit somebody with the ninjutsu, then we have 2 Mist Syndicate Nagas, we hit with those, we now have 4, we go to 8, we can kind of exponentially increase the number of Nagas we have. But the real key to this is that it specifically makes a token that's a copy of it. And the nice thing about mutate is if you mutate on top of a creature and then make a copy of it, you make a token copy of the mutated creature. So we can use Cub Warden, which is 3 and a white for a 3/5 cat. It mutates for 2 white, and it has lifelink, and whenever it mutates, create 2 1/1 white cat creature tokens with lifelink. So while Mist Syndicate Naga being mutated onto with the Cub Warden and then making a copy of itself will not actually create the 2/2 cat tokens, but it is going to give us a 3/5 with lifelink that can copy itself every single time we hit an opponent. And that is something that can get really out of hand really quickly, because not only are we now gaining the life when we're hitting, we're turning our 3/1 into a 3/5, making it much harder for our opponents to kill, and it's getting to the point where we can start leaving some back, they can block, we've got the cat tokens from the initial mutate. This is kind of a snowball that can really get out of hand if our opponents can't find a way to deal with it. And I will be honest, we're not built around mutate, but we do have a couple of other mutate creatures in the deck as well, because there's a surprising amount of cats in particular that like to mutate. So this is something that we can do multiple times if that's something we need to be doing, and possibly even get a massive mutate creature that is then copying itself, which kind of feels like, I don't want to say a goal of the deck, but it's kind of like an achievement for the deck, let's say. Moving on though, let's get to our second cool interaction, and this one is going to be between Philia Exuberant Shepherd and Sunspine Lynx. So Philia is 1 and a white for a 2/2 legendary creature, dog. It has flash, and whenever it attacks, exile up to 1 other target non-land permanent. At the beginning of the next end step, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If it entered under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Philia. So obviously Philia plays very well with Enter the Battlefield effects, and as someone who typically plays on a budget, you may notice in a lot of our videos that I don't run a ton of non-basic lands. I tend to run just enough to make the deck work, unless we're a 5-color deck or specifically a lands deck. I'm usually very high on running basic lands. So something like Sunspine Lynx is a huge benefit to us and a huge downside to our opponents. Mainly because it is 2 red for a 5/4 elemental cat that says players can't gain life, damage can't be prevented, and when it enters, it deals damage to each player equal to the number of non-basic lands that player controls. So if you see where I'm going with this, it would be pretty nice to be able to attack with Philia every turn and blink the Sunspine Lynx, exiling it and returning it to play, because every time it returns to play, it's going to be doing damage to each player equal to the number of non-basic lands they control. Now, I'm not going to lie and say that we are playing no non-basic lands, so there is a pretty solid chance it will still hit us as well, but I imagine it's going to be hitting our opponents more. And really that's all we need, because we are a bit of an aggressive deck. Being able to do, say, 5 to each opponent and maybe 2 or 3 to ourselves means we can outpace the rest of the table, get in some damage, and do a lot before our opponents can really find a way to stop it. So I do think that Philia and the Sunspine Lynx are both phenomenal cards on their own, but I think together they can create a bit of an engine that can very easily win games. Moving on from our cool interactions though, we get to the budget portion of this deck. And this week, the total deck price came in at $62.12, with the most expensive card in the deck being Nesting Dovehawk at a massive $13.40. So I will say I did not realize that this card was so expensive when I put it in the deck. Unfortunately, it is almost perfect for what we want to be doing, because it's 3 and a white for a 2/2 bird. It has flying. At the beginning of combat on your turn, populate. So we create a token that's a copy of another token we control. And whenever a creature token enters the battlefield under our control, we put a +1/+1 counter on Nesting Dovehawk. Since we intend on making so many tokens throughout the course of the game, it's incredibly important that we can have the ability to both go wide with all of our tokens, of course, and go tall by making some big creatures that our opponents are going to be unable to block. Nesting Dovehawk lets us do both by letting us populate at the beginning of combat and getting bigger whenever a token enters. So Nesting Dovehawk really is the perfect card for this deck. But like I said, it is unfortunate. It is $13. So if you were to cut it, it actually drops the total deck price below $50, which is a significant improvement. I'm not saying it's still completely affordable, but it's at least a lot better than $62. And if you did need to trim it, there are some very cool creatures that fit our creature types that we were unable to squeeze in. So I would highly recommend that if you do need a budget option, there are some other things out there. On the other hand, if you're looking for a card that's a little bit outside of our budget that could do well in the deck, I have a suggestion for you there as well, because this week I would recommend you put in Agate Instigator and taking out Firecat Blitz. So Agate Instigator, unfortunately not one of our creature types. Lizards did not make the cut for the petting zoo. It is 1 and a red for a 1/3 lizard rogue. It has Offspring for 1 and a red, and whenever another creature you control enters, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent. This is probably one of the better effects like this that we've seen, particularly for this deck, because we can Offspring it to make a token copy, which is going to immediately be a synergistic piece of our deck, being able to trigger things like Nesting Dovehawk, plus the token can be populated, making this absolutely just game-endingly powerful. And Agate Instigator being able to do 1 damage when a creature enters, already pretty good, and especially because it's going to each opponent. But if we can Offspring it and get 2 damage every single time a creature enters under our control, when we are making just a ton of tokens every single turn, that can also be game-winningly powerful. And even if you think back to something like Release the Dogs, that is 4 mana, make 4 tokens. With Agate Instigator having been Offspringed, that's 4 mana, make 4 tokens, do 8 damage to each opponent. That immediately starts to get our opponents to the point where they are losing the game. And if we can't win with something like that, then at that point we just swing, attack, and just kind of win the game that way. Now, as much as I've hyped up Agate Instigator, if you do need to put a card in, then obviously you also have to take a card out of the deck. And the card I would recommend taking out is Firecat Blitz, which is X red for a sorcery. Put X 1/1 red cat creature tokens with haste into play, remove them from the game at the end of turn, and it has flashback red, sacrifice X mountains. Now, I keep trying to find a home for Firecat Blitz, and I figured this was finally the deck for it, because we care about cats, we care about tokens. It's a great way to just kind of generate the tokens we want, but it's still very expensive for not a ton of gain, and we do have to sacrifice the creatures at the end of turn. And then if we want to flash it back, we have to sacrifice mountains specifically, which is difficult to do considering we are a 3-color deck. So I don't think it quite does what we want it to do, because even paying, say, 7 mana to make 5 1/1s feels a bit above rate from what we want to be doing. And again, not being able to keep them makes it significantly harder to say Firecat Blitz is a good card. Obviously, it's not terrible, but let me know down in the comments if you think the Blitz is worth keeping, or if you've ever seen it do anything pretty impressive, because I would love to hear success stories of Firecat Blitz. I keep, like I said, trying to make it work and just not quite feeling it. So let me know what you think. But otherwise, we are going to move on from our deck tech and get into a game with this deck, see how it performs. And before we get to that, though, I do want to take a second to highlight some of the ways that you can help support the channel if that's something you're interested in doing. So I've listed out all of our social media accounts at this point. We have quite a few of them. I'm getting a little bit overwhelmed in some cases with trying to put them all on this slide, so this is probably going to be the extent of what I can include. If I have anything else, I will make sure to toss it into the video description. But if you're looking to go above and beyond in supporting the channel, you can also find us over on Patreon, patreon.com/dungeonlearnersguide, and right here on YouTube as a channel member, which is also in the description of the video, where you get access to things like a Discord channel where we brew up a lot of the decks and also play the games that appear on the channel. You can get access to the deck lists a week early, the unedited gameplay videos, and a ton of other cool things. So if you're interested, please do check us out. And as always, a quick shout out to all of our patrons and channel members. So a thank you goes out to William Swiftfoot, Doodle, Eric Hui, Jeff Winger, Jeffrey Boos, Salty and Sunshine, Tyler Esme, Sven van Nimwegen, Patty Whack, Keegan Tawney, and Jakar. So with no further ado, let's get into our game and see how this deck performs. So as always, we are going to be joined by 3 opponents this week. We have Omnath, Locus of Mana, being played by Doodle, Ruby, Daring Tracker, being played by Luke, and Marchesa the Black Rose, being played by Cole. Starting off with Doodle's Omnath deck, he has affectionately called it his Omnom deck because his goal is to have Omnath kind of eat the other creatures on the table. He wants to play a ton of fight effects and more specifically bite effects, things that do damage one way, so he can take advantage of Omnath becoming a massive monster and then kind of just swing in once he's cleared the board and start knocking people out with commander damage. So I am very excited to see what Omnath can do. I've always been a big fan of the Jelly Bean, so we'll see how it does. Moving on to Luke and his Ruby deck, just as almost a trigger warning in a sense, he is playing this deck unsleeved. I know that can kind of grate on some people's nerves, so be prepared for that going into this. This is kind of a budget deck that he threw together with the intention being that he's only playing Ruby, and then he's playing a bunch of 4-mana ramp spells, so he can go turn 2 Ruby, turn 3 4-mana ramp spell, and then everything else in the deck is 6+ mana. So he's got just massive green and red bombs that he wants to dump into play. A lot of them are commons and uncommons because that's just kind of the nature of the deck, and I think it's a ton of fun. He's played it a couple of times before, and every time you think about the theme of it, you're like, oh, 2 to 4 to 6, that's probably going to take a while. It's just going to be big, beefy creatures. We can deal with that. And then every single game, it just kind of beats face. So I am very excited to see this deck again. It reminds me of when I started playing Magic, which I think is a ton of fun. And then last but not least, we of course have Cole playing his Marchesa deck. And this is kind of just a dethrone and +1/+1 counter deck, which is a lot of fun for Marchesa. There's a lot of value to be had, and one of his main things that he wants to be doing is sacrificing his own creatures for value, because once they've got a +1/+1 counter on them, he can sacrifice it, get the value, and then still bring that creature back into play, which I think is kind of cool. And it's very rare to see a Grixis kind of an aggro style deck, so I do appreciate that Marchesa brings that to the game. So overall, I am very excited for this game. I love everyone's commanders. I think it's going to be a ton of fun. But get your predictions in. Let me know down in the comments which commander you think is going to walk out the winner this week. And as always, if you haven't already, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel. And I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, I go first, followed by Doodle, Luke, and then Cole. On my first turn, I play a Temple of Epiphany, scrying 1. Doodle plays a forest. Luke plays a forest. Cole plays a Bloodstained Mire, sacrificing it and losing a life to search his library for a Xander's Lounge, putting it into play. I play an Izzet Boilerworks, returning Temple of Epiphany to my hand, but then I have to discard to hand size. Doodle plays a forest. Luke plays a mountain and casts his commander, Ruby, Daring Tracker, then attacks Doodle for 1 since she has haste. Cole plays a mountain. I play a plains and cast Zinnia, Valley's Voice, getting +1/+0 for each other creature with base power 1 I control, and also giving all my creature spells Offspring for 2. Doodle plays a forest and casts his commander, Omnath, Locus of Mana, making it so green mana can't empty from his mana pool, and giving Omnath +1/+1 for each green mana he has floating. Luke plays a mountain and casts Fire Mind's Vessel. Cole plays a Forge of Heroes, then casts Sage of Fables, letting his other wizards enter with a +1/+1 counter, and letting him activate it and remove a counter from a creature he controls to draw a card. I play an island and cast Skycat Sovereign, paying for Offspring, so I also create a 1/1 token copy of it. Then, both of them get +1/+1 for each other flying creature I control, and can be activated for 4 mana to make a 1/1 cat bird token. After that, I attack Luke for 3 with Zinnia. Doodle plays a Rogue's Passage and casts Rancor, enchanting Omnath, giving it +2/+0 and Trample, then casts Nature's Way, giving Omnath Vigilance and Trample until the end of turn, having it do damage to target creature equal to its power, which is currently 4, and this lets him do 4 damage to Zinnia, killing it. Once that's resolved, he attacks Luke for 4 with his commander. On Luke's turn, he simply untaps and passes, missing his 4th land drop. On Cole's turn, he plays a Shivan Reef and casts Black Market Connections. On my turn, I play a Temple of Epiphany, scrying 1, then cast Nesting Dovehawk, populating when I move to combat, this time creating a token copy of the Skycat Sovereign, then also putting a +1/+1 counter on the Dovehawk whenever a token enters under my control. This then lets me attack Cole and Doodle both for 4 with a Skycat each. On Doodle's turn, he cast Horrific Assault, having Omnath deal damage equal to its power to target creature, which is currently 7, killing my Nesting Dovehawk. Then he attacks me for 7 with Omnath, and at the end of turn, Luke casts Blastfire Bolt, doing 5 damage to Omnath, killing it, but when Rancor goes to the graveyard, Doodle returns it to his hand. In response though, Doodle casts Return of the Wildspeaker to draw 3 cards, since he controls a creature with 3 power. On Luke's turn, he plays a mountain and casts Wrecking Beast, which enters with a +1/+1 counter thanks to Riot. In Cole's upkeep, he pays 3 life with Black Market Connections to draw a card and make a treasure token, then plays a mountain and casts his commander Marchesa the Black Rose, giving all his creatures dethrone, and if one of his creatures dies while it has a +1/+1 counter on it, then it's returned to the battlefield under his control at the beginning of the next end step. She also enters with a counter thanks to Sage of Fables, then he attacks Doodle with the Sage, putting a +1/+1 counter on it and hitting Doodle for 3. I play a Desert of the Fervent and cast Bolt Hound, which gives all my other creatures +1/+0 whenever it attacks, which I immediately do, attacking Doodle for 2 and attacking Cole and Luke both for 4. Doodle plays a Forest and casts Hornet Nest, which lets him make a 1/1 insect with flying and death touch equal to the amount of damage it's dealt. After that, he cast Blizzard Brawl, giving the Hornet Nest +1/+0, indestructible, and having it fight the Wrecking Beast. In order to prevent Doodle from making 7 insects, which effectively stops me from attacking him, I cast Contraband Livestock, exiling the Hornet Nest and rolling a d20, giving Doodle a 2/2 boar token since I roll a 14. Once that's resolved, Doodle recasts Rancor, enchanting the boar token. On Luke's turn, he attacks me for 7 with the Wrecking Beast, and in his second main phase, casts Dragon Mage, making each player discard their hand and draw 7 cards when it deals combat damage to an opponent. In Cole's upkeep, he pays 3 life for Black Market, drawing a card and making a treasure, plays a Spymaster's Vault, and casts Plague Crafter, making each player sacrifice a creature, killing my Bolt Hound, Doodle's Boar, Luke's Ruby, and the Plague Crafter itself, which also results in Rancor returning to Doodle's hand. Once that's resolved, Cole casts Chthonian Nightmare, getting 3 energy when it enters, and allowing him to return it to his hand and pay X energy to return a creature with mana value X or less from his graveyard to the battlefield. He then moves to combat and attacks Doodle with the Sage and Marchesa, putting a counter on each of them and hitting him for 9 total damage. On my turn, I play a mountain and cast Springjack Shepherd, making 4/0/1 goat tokens when it enters, since my current devotion to white is 4. I then attack Cole for 6 with 2 of my Skycats. On Doodle's turn, he recast his commander Omnath, and also recast Rancor, enchanting it to give it +2/+0 and trample. On Luke's turn, he cast Bear Down, destroying Cole's Chthonian Nightmare, then attacks me for 7 with the Wrecking Beast, and attacks Cole for 5 with the Dragon Mage. Before damage, Cole casts Terminate, destroying the Dragon Mage and taking no damage, while I still take 7. Then, in Luke's second main phase, he recasts his commander, Ruby. In Cole's upkeep, he pays 3 life to draw a card and make a treasure with black market connections, then plays an island and casts Brotherhood Regalia, equipping it to Marchesa, giving her Ward 2, making her an assassin in addition to her other types, and making her unblockable. Then he attacks Luke with the Sage, putting a counter on it and hitting him for 5, and also attacks me with Marchesa for 5. In Cole's second main phase, he cast a Goblin Bombardment, letting him sacrifice a creature to do 1 damage to any target. On my turn, I cast my commander, Akim the Soaring Wind, letting me make a 1/1 bird token whenever I make a token for the first time each turn, and letting me pay 6 to give all my tokens double strike. I then attack Cole for 8 and Luke for 4 with my Skycats, and before my end step, Cole casts Deadly Dispute, sacrificing Sage of Fables to draw 2 cards and make a treasure token. Then when I move to my end step, he returns the Sage to play with Marchesa's ability. On Doodle's turn, he simply untaps and passes. Luke casts a Hedron Archive and also casts Sachi, Daughter of Sashiro, giving his snakes +0/+1 and letting his shaman tap for 2 green mana. He then attacks me for 7 with Wrecking Beast, and I block with all 4 of my goat tokens. Before damage though, Doodle casts Ram Through, having the Wrecking Beast do damage equal to its power to one of my goats, killing it, then, since it has trample, doing any excess damage to me, so I also take 6. Then the Wrecking Beast tramples over my 3 remaining goats, killing them and doing another 4 damage to me as well. In Cole's upkeep, he pays 3 life to draw a card and make a treasure token with black market connections, plays an Underground River, and casts Diabolic Intent, sacrificing Sage of Fables to search his library for a card and put it into his hand. After that, he casts Unspeakable Symbol, letting him pay 3 life to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Then he also casts Kokusho the Evening Star, and pays 3 life to put a +1/+1 counter on it. Before the ability can resolve though, Doodle casts Infectious Bite, having Omnath do 5 damage to Kokusho since Omnath's power is 5, and giving each opponent a poison counter. Since this kills Kokusho, it makes each of Cole's opponents lose 5 life while he gains the amount lost, which is 15, and I get knocked out of the game. After that, he attacks Doodle with Marchesa, putting a counter on her and hitting Doodle for 6. On Doodle's turn, he casts Halana, Kessig Ranger, letting him pay 2 mana when another creature enters under his control to have it deal damage equal to its power to target creature. He then attacks Cole for 7 with Omnath, and before the end of turn, Cole sacrifices Marchesa to do 1 damage to Luke, then he returns her to the battlefield with her own ability. On Luke's turn, he casts a Boarding Party, cascading into Skyshroud Claim when it's cast, searching his library for 2 forests, putting them into play. Once that's resolved, he casts Scour from Existence, exiling Halana. Before that resolves, Doodle casts Bite Down to have a Halana do 3 damage to Boarding Party, killing it before being exiled. After that, Luke attacks Doodle for 7 with his Wrecking Beast. In Cole's upkeep, he pays a life to make a treasure with black market connections, then casts Atsushi the Blazing Sky, and pays 3 more life to put a +1/+1 counter on it. This lets him sacrifice Atsushi to do 1 damage to Luke and exile the top 2 cards of his library when it dies, being able to play them until the end of his next turn. After that, Cole re-equips Marchesa with the Brotherhood Regalia, letting him attack Luke with Marchesa since she's now unblockable, putting a +1/+1 counter on her and hitting him for 4. In his second main phase, Cole casts Satoru the Infiltrator, letting him draw a card whenever a creature enters under his control without being cast. Before the end of turn, Cole sacrifices Marchesa to do 1 damage to Luke. Then, at the end of turn, Atsushi and Marchesa both return to play under Cole's control, drawing him 2 cards with Satoru. On Doodle's turn, he casts Gargos, Vicious Watcher, making his Hydra spells cost 4 less to cast, and letting Gargos fight target creature when one of his creatures is targeted by a spell. He then attacks Luke for 5 with Omnath, and before the end of turn, Cole pays 3 life to put a +1/+1 counter on Atsushi. In response, Doodle casts Hunter's Mark, giving Gargos +1/+1 and having it deal damage equal to its power to Atsushi, also triggering Gargos to have it fight Marchesa. In response to that, Cole sacrifices both Atsushi and Marchesa to do 2 damage to Luke, knocking him out of the game. This also lets Cole exile the top 2 cards of his library, being able to cast them until his next turn. In Cole's upkeep, he pays a life to make a treasure with black market connections, then cast Mausoleum Wanderer, and after that, he equips Satoru with Brotherhood Regalia, giving it unblockable, and allowing him to attack Doodle for exactly 3, knocking him out and winning Cole the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game. Everyone's deck kind of got the chance to shine in that game, which always makes it one of my favorites. Starting, I guess, with our deck, I think we did very well. I think the ability to offspring our Skycat Sovereign early in the game and then continuously try to make more token copies of it, and then eventually dropping some other tokens and some ways to synergize with what we were doing, it felt like the deck itself was running very well. We just got a little bit unfortunate that there were some things on the board we couldn't deal with, some life loss effects, things like that. But for the most part of the game, we did play the aggro deck. We were hitting people pretty consistently. And I will say, I think that I spread out the damage probably a bit too much. I always feel a little bit bad kind of like knocking one person out with an aggro strategy, so I did spread the damage around, and that may have come back to bite us, because if I had focused in on, say, Cole or Doodle or Luke even, I think that we wouldn't have been in a position where everyone kind of had a bit of a vendetta against us and was looking our way. We could have just taken people out one at a time, so maybe a mistake in retrospect. Let me know what you think in the comments on knocking people out one by one. But moving around the table to Doodle's Omnath deck, I was very impressed with Doodle's deck. I honestly did not know that there were that many instant speed bite effects in Magic. I knew that there were instant speed fight, and I knew there were a lot of sorcery speed bite effects, but he really pretty much had an instant speed do damage effect every single turn, which was very impressive and kind of unexpected. And I think Omnath lends itself well to that style of deck, so it was very cool. Hopefully we'll get to see it again in the future. Moving on to Luke's deck. Getting to the Ruby deck, he did pretty much what he wanted to do. He got Ruby on turn 2, got Ramp on turn 4, and started dropping bombs afterwards. It's always a ton of fun to see kind of the nonsense that comes out of these types of decks, because you get to see things like Blast Firebolt, just a 6-mana removal spell that nobody really plays but was perfect in this situation, which I think is always a ton of fun. It's a great way to reuse some, I don't want to say the word draft chaff, but kind of some underloved commons and uncommons that don't see a ton of play in Commander. So it's super sweet. I love it, and he almost got the win. And then last but not least, though, we got to talk about our winner, Cole. Marchesa is just a massive value engine. Every time I see that commander, there's always some new tech for it or something else that it's able to do that it just kind of comes out of nowhere, and you keep thinking, oh, I can deal with this or I can deal with that. And then you just kind of can't. There's always something going on with it. Even if you board wipe, they'll typically get a lot of their stuff back, so you have to board wipe twice, and you have to worry about them putting counters on it in between the board wipes. So very cool showing by Cole. It really showed the staying power, I think, that Marchesa has. So Very cool deck, very cool game. I hope you all enjoyed it. I know I certainly did. I had a ton of fun. Let me know down in the comments if there's any cards you would like to see me build around in the future. As always, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.